Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Una. Thank you, IndieList, for having me today. My name's Steve Morgan, and this talk is called Anti-Sal, based on the book of the same name. And there we go. Right, first things first is just to mention that this talk is based on a book. It came out in 2019, and earlier this year, for its 5th anniversary, I got the cover redesigned. So the only reason I'm mentioning this is just in case you've seen the one on the left out in the wild sometime during the previous 5 years, or you've seen, I didn't want to not mention it, and then you see the one on the right and wonder, is it the same author? Is it the same book? It is me. It's the same book, a different cover. Just wanted to mention that in case sometime in the past you've seen the one on the left. A bit about me before we start, just so you know. I find about me slides quite cringy and usually do them at the end, but I think it's important to know who I am and am I eligible for giving this talk, So I have been working in SEO, search engine optimization, full-time since 2009, which is a scary thought how it's been that long. And I've been freelancing since 2013. Before freelancing, I worked at a couple of different agencies, a brief in-house role at confused.com, the big UK insurance comparison site. And then my parents are self-employed, my brother's self-employed, kind of picked up the self-employment bug from them and decided to go freelance. And I set up a business called Morgan Online Marketing. I've got a few side projects though. Anti-Sal, the business book about, selling and networking for people who hate selling and networking, as this talk will go into depth on. A few years ago, I got into writing fantasy, epic fantasy, and sometime in the next couple of weeks, hopefully, my first fantasy novel called Demons, The Birth of Magic, will be released through Amazon. And DM of the Mists, I'm a big Dungeons and Dragons fan, and DM in this context stands for Dungeon Master, and I give advice to people for running D&D games. Particularly, there's a popular adventure called Curse of Strahd, which is about a vampire similar to Dracula. And there's a setting called Ravenloft, which is like the horror setting. And I give advice to people on running those. I've been doing that the last 6 months. But anyway, let's get to the crux of the talk. And I'm going to start off with a confession. I hate sales. I don't just hate sales. I hate sales. I hate it with a big fiery passion. I wish I could just do my freelancing without the ickiness and the supposed grossness of, having to say, you've got to pay me money in order for me to do the work. Why can't I just do the work for you? But obviously I can't do the work for free. But so we've got to do sales. I think the problem with sales is it has an image problem. You might recognize this film. That's a young Alec Baldwin. I don't think I've seen the film, but I've seen this scene. And you might recognize some of the quotes that come from it, like ABC, always be closing, and coffee is for closers. And there's one point where he says something like, first place wins a set of steak knives, second place you're fired, as if to say, if you're not the best and working as hard as you can, you're doomed. Your second place is considered, the end of your role. And more recently, I say more recently, this is probably still about 10 years ago now, The Wolf of Wall Street, which have an all-star cast led by Leonardo DiCaprio, based on a true story, where a lot of them are selling penny stocks over the phone, and they're being very schmoozy and using every tactic they can to get people to say yes and do business with them. And I think, when myself included, I think a lot of freelancers or anyone, when they think of sales, they think of things like this and think that that's the way it's got to be. No, it doesn't have to be like that. You don't have to do sales like that. In my experience, the best way to sell is not to sell. The best way to sell is not to sell. And I know it sounds a bit silly, it sounds a bit counterintuitive, but it's the truth. And it's also worked well for me the last 10 plus years. And so I'm going to spend the next 35-ish minutes, 30 minutes, telling you 12 tips, or 12, we'll cover 12 topics, and then each of them contains multiple tips within them on how to sell and network for people who don't like sales and networking. Number one is that networking does not necessarily have to mean business networking events. It certainly was what I thought when I first started networking. I thought, it's called business networking, and I wanted to do networking for my business, and I thought I had to go to these events where people dress up smart and shake hands and give each other business cards. No, you don't have to network that way. I mean, you can, and it can work, and I enjoyed some of the business networking I did as well as other things, but you don't have to do that. If you don't like the idea of that, you're not comfortable with those kinds of settings and that kind of thing, don't worry, you don't have to do that. I'll give you two examples. This is a old blogger meetup. This I've just seen the tweet date. It's from 2013, so over 10 years ago. This was a blogger meetup in Cardiff, and they used to have a different thing happen with each event. Sometimes they'd have talks, and this one they just put people into groups so they could meet each other. And I used to go along to these because I just started a blog, but I was an SEO professional, as mentioned earlier. And naturally, people used to ask me about SEO and ask questions because everyone wants to improve the SEO of their blog and get more people to see their blog and their content. So I would just give people advice and share tips. And, I wouldn't say, oh, you'd have to, pay me or whatever. I would just, help them and they would help me with some blogging tips. And I ended up doing really well there. Like, I think I was pretty much the only SEO professional or only person who knew SEO well to go to that kind of event. So when those people needed SEO help, or they knew people who needed SEO help, they would think of me. And another similar one, I used to be a member for a long time of a co-working space. Since COVID, I've kind of had more of a home setup. Plus, my kids are in school now, so it's easier for the school runs. But I used to go to co-working spaces quite a lot in the old days. And this was one where they used to do different events. And this was one event they put on called All Night Long, where every 2 months on a Friday, they would keep the office open until midnight and people could work late. They'd provide pizza for free, and just getting to know people in that kind of environment was really useful. It felt very informal, but in the way it was kind of like everyone was more willing and happy to talk. People were working on maybe side projects instead of client work because it would be like 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock on a Friday night. And even outside of that event, just at the co-working space in general, I did pretty well networking there. So ultimately, networking is what you make of it. I know that's a pretty cheesy way to say it, but it doesn't have to be business networking events. It can be, there's a ton of different ways you can network, and you can network in a way that suits you. Number two, go to semi-related events and meetups, and I'll share two examples of what I mean. So this first one, working in SEO, I've spoken at different SEO events, and I'm very chuffed to say that I've spoken at one of the biggest SEO conferences in the UK called Brighton SEO, about 3 or 4 times now over the space of about 10 years. And that's obviously not me on the stage, but it gives you an idea of what one of the smaller stages looks like. So their main stage can hold like thousands of people, and even the smaller stages can hold hundreds. And I spoke in a room that size with that many people twice, 2 different occasions. And so here's example one. Spoke at a big SEO conference twice, audience size combined probably about 500, and the number of inquiries I got after it where somebody said to me, oh, I wanted to get in touch and ask you to help with SEO because I saw you brought an SEO talk, was the grand total of 1. So not as great as I was kind of hoping. And compare it to this example. This is, as you can see, it's a much smaller room, lots less people. This is a web developer and software developer meetup in Cardiff. Again, that tweet date is from over 10 years ago. Funny enough, they've just reformed and started doing meetups again, Unified Diff. And there was probably, it's quite a small co-working space that's not going anymore. About 50-ish people, I think they had at the most, probably less. And when I spoke at that, so instead of a large SEO conference, it was a smaller web development meetup, less than 50 people, so probably 10 times less people. The number of direct inquiries they got afterwards were within 24, 48 hours where someone said, I saw your talk at the web developer meetup, wanted to hire you. At least 6. Now I know what you're thinking, that's like 10% number of people, but like 6 times the inquiries. And I think it's because when someone like me doing SEO goes to an SEO conference, yes, there could be potential clients there, but the majority of people I'm presenting in front of are agencies and other freelancers. But when I went and spoke at this web developer meetup, web development and SEO kind of go hand in hand. People want to build a website that then ranks well in search engines. And web developers tend to know a little bit about SEO, but not a lot. And so someone like me coming along doing an SEO talk, they're like, wow, okay, I know a bit more about SEO now. And this person, Steve, knows a lot about SEO. Maybe I'll get in touch with him about doing some SEO work. Or if they might not get in touch directly, but if they might remember my name the next time someone gets in touch and says, oh, do you know someone who does SEO? And oh, there was that guy Steve who did that talk. And it makes a huge difference if you go to what I call semi-related events. So where you're like one step away from what it is you offer. So other examples for me could include a WordPress meetup, an e-commerce or online business meetup. Startup meetups could be good. I've done well contributing at startup Facebook groups, even just giving general advice, not necessarily advice about SEO, but advice about starting a business, because I've done that as well, being a freelancer. PR meetups, because PR and the SEO side of things, there's a part of SEO called link building, and PR and link building work really well together, and a design meetup. So what I want you to think about is what would work well for you. If you're a writer or a social media marketer, or gosh, I'm drawing a blank, something else. What are your semi-related events and meetups? Tips for making networking easy. I'm just going to take a sip of my drink because I already feel like I'm starting to lose my voice. That's going good. I appreciate not everyone likes networking. So here's a few tips on just how to take this thing out on networking that might help you. One is to go with a friend. Now, the risk is you could just end up, talking to your friend the whole time. I would argue that if you don't like the idea of going to a networking event at all, and going with a friend is what gets you going, that's better than nothing. You can either go with a friend and end up talking to your friend quite a lot, or not go at all. But it helps you to, if it gives you confidence to go, that's great. It might be that they meet someone and can introduce you to them, or you can kind of work the room 50-50. So afterwards, they tell you who they met and you tell them who you met, and that might actually be, it's like doubling out your efforts in a way. Some events, if they make it available, some events publish their list of attendees. So this used to be a setting on Eventbrite. I don't know if it still is anymore. And the website meetup.com, you can often see who else is going to the event. And that can be really handy, not for being, stalking, like, being snooping on who's going and being weird about it, but more the fact that you might recognize some people and that can often soften the blow and think, oh, well, at least if I know I'm going to this event, there's a few people I can catch up with. There might be someone there who you've been dying to meet, and they're going to go. Well, they said they're going to go. If they actually go is a different matter, but it looks like they're going to go. And another thing you can do is sometimes people make they might tweet about going to an event, whether they include the handle, so they'll do @name, or if there's a hashtag. And what you can do is you can have a look at that before you go and maybe just chat to a few people. And the great thing then is when you go to the event and recognize them, you can say, hey, I think I know you. Didn't we talk on Twitter before? I should call it X now, shouldn't I? It's not called Twitter anymore. Old habits and all that. But yeah, so that can be a huge icebreaker as well, where that person might have recognized you and you've kind of broken the ice a little bit before going to the event. Number 4 is to start something. So let me tell you the story of another side project I used to have, Cardiff SEO Meet. So I used to run an SEO meetup. That's me on the stage at one of the venues. This was, I think, the year before COVID, so go back 5-6 years ago now. And used to invite, I think they were every 3 months, used to invite 2 speakers and did something called a site review where people would volunteer their websites and we try and give tips and advice, which worked really well. And there used to be these 2 guys who came to every event. Really friendly, really supportive, really complimentary. Every time at the end of an event, they'd make an effort to come see me and thank me. I'd say, cheers, guys, see you at the next one. And then after 3 or 4 events, they just randomly said to me, oh, you're a freelancer, aren't you? And I said, yes. And they go, oh, we work at, household name business. And I had no idea that they worked at this big business. And they were like, well, we actually need some freelance work. Do you want to come in the office next week and meet our boss and come on board? And I was like, yeah, please. And obviously, you could argue that by going to an event, you might meet a couple of people. Going to an event regularly, you might meet a couple of people, a couple more. You might get to know some people even better. Speaking at events, everyone at that event will learn who you are. But by being the host of an event and a regular event, you're like the figurehead and the face of that event, and everyone there is going to get to know you really well and get to learn more about you. So obviously it's a big undertaking starting something like a meetup in my case, and it did eat up a lot of my time, but I enjoyed doing it. I was saying to the guys before the call started, before the webinar started, sorry, that in a past life, I actually wanted to be an event manager before getting into SEO. So it kind of married my 2 passions, events and SEO, and got some clients out of it as well. And it doesn't have to be a meetup. If you don't like the idea of a meetup, it could be a conference, it could be a webinar, it could be a podcast, it could be an online community, it could be something else. It could be something that you see on this list and think, oh, I've been thinking of starting a webinar, I've been thinking of starting a podcast. Well, know that it could be a good networking opportunity. I know what you're thinking. Why is there, if you notice the asterisk next to podcast, how is starting a podcast a networking opportunity? Yes, you can use it as like a marketing tool, but networking with people when you're just recording a thing and putting it on iTunes or wherever? Well, this leads me on to my next tip really comfortably, which is you can invite people you want to network with on those things. So, it could be if you're running an event or a webinar, you could invite them as a speaker. If you're doing a podcast where you interview people, you could invite them as a guest. If you have, say, a blog, you could do a Q&A or an interview of somebody and just, if you don't like the idea of running an event or doing a podcast or a webinar, just send them an email, say, hey, do you want to be featured on my blog? And send them some questions by email. They send them back and you copy paste it into a blog post, job done. Nice and easy. An example for me could be a big, a head of SEO at a big local company, a big company local to where I am. There's one called Admiral Insurance, big insurance company. And my wife works for them, funny enough. And there's nothing stopping me from approaching the head of SEO, whoever he or she may be, and say, hey, do you want to be a guest at my event or on my podcast? And worst case scenario, they say no or they don't reply. And then it could just be the case that it doesn't lead to anything more. The second worst case scenario is at least you've gotten a good guest out of it. But that person might not have known who I was at that point, but now they do. And it's not just necessarily about them. They might know other heads of SEOs of companies might listen to the podcast or read the interview or what have you, and potentially get onto their radar as well. So it feels a little bit cheeky. It's almost like saying, oh, you don't say to the person, no, I'm only inviting you on because, I'm hoping to network with you. You get them because you want to have them as a guest or an interviewee anyway, but it's a bit of a tactic you can use to try and, get those people and get onto their radar, and then hopefully they'll remember you in the future if and when they need freelance help. Number 6, if you struggle to network offline, do it online. And I used to give this advice 5-10 years ago, and then with COVID forcing everyone online, it certainly made it easier. But the obvious things are things like forums, blog comments, whether it's Discuss or the classic sort of WordPress style blog commenting. There's private communities. I'm a member of a freelance community that recently moved from Facebook groups to Circle, and I think quite a few people use Circle. Facebook groups, LinkedIn groups, webinars, even webinars in the comments section. It's not ideal. It'd be good if you're the host of a webinar or a guest on a webinar, pardon me. But even just, like this webinar today, jumping in the first few minutes. And, if you do that regularly, and if there's comments or Q&A at the end, you'll get known by not just the hosts and the guests, but other people at the webinar as well. So every little helps. Number 7, consider co-working. Now, I will admit that co-working is not for everyone. I've met a lot of people when I say co-working, they're like, no, don't want to do co-working, no. And I completely appreciate if someone would rather work from home all the time. It's easier, it's convenient. There's no time out of the office on a commute. It's cheaper, obviously, because they're paying for the public transport or the parking and then the co-working space itself. But I would say give it a chance. And people say this about networking events. They say it's the people who make the event, not the event itself. And it's the same with co-working. It's the people who make a space. And I would suggest if you're going to give co-working a go, don't just try one. Try 2, 3, 4 different spaces, because you might go to one that just isn't very good or is having a quiet or a bad day. I'll give you a few examples. I went to one once where the person who was supposed to introduce themselves and get people set up was busy. And so I went into this room and everyone was on headphones. Nobody told me where the coffee was, the toilets were, or even how to connect to the Wi-Fi. Not a good start. I went to one once, and this was only about a year or so ago as well, where I went to their co-working space and I ended up all on my own in a room all day. Even the people who ran the co-working space weren't in that room. So I ended up just paying 20 odd pounds, I don't know how that equates to euros, like 25-ish euros, just to sit in somebody's office essentially for a day and not talk to anyone, which is ridiculous, right? That's not co-working. So yeah, imagine though if like I went to that and was like, oh, co-working sucks. and they didn't go to any co-working spaces. And what actually happened in the early days of my co-working is the first space I went to it was okay. It was good, not great, not terrible. And the second space I went to was amazing. And I ended up joining there and being a member for nearly 10 years. So imagine if I made the judgment call after that first space that went, nah, co-working's okay, but it's not for me. And I missed out on that opportunity. And then I don't co-work much as I used to, hence the small print at the bottom. But when I did used to go co-working, I had a sort of mini strategy. Strategy is kind of a loose term, I guess, where I used to be based at one primarily, where I'd go maybe a couple of times a week, sort of a hybrid thing where I work a couple of times a week and then a couple of times a week I'd work from home. But then a couple of times a month, I would go to different co-working spaces out and about. In Cardiff and South Wales, we've got quite a few. There's one that there's like a brand that has like maybe a dozen spaces throughout South Wales. And then there's obviously some individual ones as well. And what I found as well through my networking habits was I could go to like one of the other co-working spaces, and if I knew one or two people there, that was a great in because I could catch up with that person. They might say, hey, I'll introduce you to some people here you should meet. And it just became this really good, comfortable thing where I could just go to a co-working space and know that I'll probably bump into like one or two people I know, and it not be a case if I just go there and it's, don't talk to anyone for the whole day, which does happen sometimes. And there's one space I go to now and again where it does feel a bit like that. But, sometimes you find that if you become well networked enough, anywhere you go, you might know hopefully one person, and that helps to break the ice. And it's someone who can introduce you to other people. Tips for getting known in a co-working space straight away if you do consider co-working. They often have communities outside of the co-working space, often usually the form of like a Facebook group or some other online community, or they might host events and you can go to the events as well. My old co-working space had a Facebook group. And it was one of those things where, as the co-working space grew, they had 2 or 3 different co-working spaces across their site. It was kind of 2 in one building, and then they started expanding the business park they're in, and there was like a third one. And it became impossible to kind of keep track on people and meet people. I'd meet people in the co-working space I was in, but not necessarily the others. And let's say I grabbed my laptop and popped into them briefly or whatever. But on the online community, everyone was contributing to that. So by being active in the online community as well, I was getting to know the other people. They were getting to know me, and that helped as well. You can ask people for an intro coffee. So there was a guy I know who joined, and I think he came as like a taster one day, and he put a message on the online community saying, "Hi, I'm so and so. I'm new here. I'd love to just meet some people. I'll buy you a coffee if you want to spend half an hour chatting to me." And I had a bit of free time. I was like, yeah, sure, go ahead. And he bought me a fancy coffee. They obviously have a nice filter coffee in the co-working space, but it also had like an on-site cafe that did your fancy cappuccinos and stuff. So for the price of a couple of pounds, couple of euros for a coffee, he just talked to me and got to know him. And he did that for a few people, and he went from knowing barely anyone to knowing people straight away who could then introduce him the next time he went, and people he could chat to again. And that makes a big difference as well for just the cost of a few euros, like I say. And the biggest hack of all time, when you go to a co-working space, take cake. And I know it sounds silly, but honestly, there's a few times I've seen it where someone walks into a room and says, "Hi, I'm just working here from the day, but I have a dozen cupcakes," and literally everyone will just flood to them and be their best friend. And I'm gluten-free, so, bring some gluten-free ones for me, please. But seriously, it does work, and it's just a good way to, again, just for the cost of a few euros, it's a good way to sort of meet some people, break the ice really quickly and easily. Create resources for your target audience. So I get a bit carried away with side projects. I'm one of these people who always likes to have something to do outside of work. And I created 2 side projects that kind of helped with networking and people sort of discovering me through them. One of them was a map of all the co-working spaces of South Wales. This is the map kind of recently, the screenshot, but about sort of 10 years ago when I started it, there were probably only about 10 co-working spaces in the whole of South Wales. Obviously, it kind of balloomed since then. And color-coded pins tying in with their branding, and it gives a good sort of at a glance of, well, yeah, there's loads in Cardiff, but there's some towards Southwest Wales. There's some just sort of north of Cardiff towards the South Wales valleys. And it's just really good to kind of see what's out there. Obviously, things like, you can just type in co-working Cardiff and see what comes up from Google Maps, but it was just kind of a nice way, especially for the ones who are pretty terrible at doing Google Map listings or don't have their own website or don't have ways to advertise. It's kind of a nice way to do that. I don't really advertise it as much now, or keep it up to date now as much as I used to. And it was getting complicated with some people saying, "Oh, I'm a coffee shop. Surely I should be added because I offer co-working." It's like, ugh. But yeah, stuff like that. That became kind of handy. People found discovering me through that. It was on my SEO blog, which mentions I'm a freelancer, and so on and so on. And another one I did was techevents.wales. This isn't live anymore. If you go to techevents.wales, it kind of redirects you to an anti-sale blog post that kind of talks through why I created it and what it was. But essentially, I used a plugin that I created a WordPress website and used a plugin that pulled data through the APIs of Eventbrite and Meetup.com. And whenever a new event or meetup got added that was tech related in South Wales, you can see some examples there of like one that's Python, one that's AI, one about cybersecurity. I actually put my SEO meetup in this because why not? Obviously, could you know, cheekily kind of advertise that as well. It would automatically put them in, and this was good as well for people who, rather than having to keep tabs on all of them individually, could just see like, right, what's coming up in the next couple of weeks. And it was good as well. There's a community called Cardiff Start that likes to try and champion South Wales as a great base of, starting a business, or the big Silicon Valley businesses if they move to the UK to consider moving to Cardiff. And this was kind of a nice way for them to say, look, we've got all these events coming up. And I did actually get linked to from the Welsh government website at one point, which blew my mind. They were kind of like showing it as an example, and I was like, oh my gosh, the SEO in me, because I'm digressing here. But links from other websites help your website, and a link from a government website is like gold dust. So I was super happy. But yeah, it was it was only a couple of years, and I think it became a bit too expensive to maintain. There might be issues with the AI or the plugin not working properly. I killed it in the end. It was too much of a time sink, but it was good fun while it lasted. And again, people found me through that website. Okay, number 9, social media etiquette. I'm just gonna get some more water. Crucial know what the time is as well. I'm doing a good time. I thought I was racing through it and going to be finished in like 10 minutes or something. Social etiquette or social media etiquette. Let's talk about that. So I'm a strong believer that your online self should equal and reflect your offline self. Treats. It sounds a bit cheesy, but I say treat online social networks as sort of an extension of what you're like as a person in real life, rather than having this almost like a persona where your online persona is different to how if somebody's met you at an event. I'll tell you an example. There's a friend of mine. He's a writer. I'd say about 90% of his tweets are on the subject of politics. Now, I like to think that if you went to a house party and you started talking to people and 90% of your conversation was about politics, those people would probably be like, right, I'm going to go over here and talk to this person over here now. And yet people do this. And I appreciate this is a really privileged take, that I don't, I don't talk about politics much because it doesn't really affect me, but there might be people who are ethnic minorities or LGBTQ or women who talk more about politics because they have to, because it affects them more. So I appreciate it's easy for me to say, oh, don't talk about politics, whereas politics might be something that's important to you. But I guess what I'm trying to say is just be careful doing it too much. Maybe just to talk about it a little, but also make sure you're talking about other stuff as well. So it's not just all 90+% politics, like that guy I use as an example. Similarly, don't always or only talk about business. There's a friend of mine, I won't name names, I adore her, but 100% of her Instagram posts and stories and reels are about her running her business. And there are a lot of people, myself included, who want to champion her. But in my opinion, that's just a bit too far on and it's a bit boring. And, I think some people panic and worry, oh, I've got to talk about business to be a professional and stuff. But I would argue that people want to know what you're like, the person behind the business, the person running the business. Sometimes I want to know what music people like to listen to, what movies they like, what food they eat, as bland as that sounds. Where did they go on holiday recently? What events have they gone to? Stuff like that. And then also know more about their business and, kind of all of that big, and then the occasional like, oh, this is how my business is doing, or this is a new service I've done, kind of added in, sporadically amongst all that, is a lot better than just 100% of everything you're doing is about your business. Be consistent. I say this, I actually break this rule at the moment because my Facebook profile picture is different to my Twitter and LinkedIn, because it's tying in more with the YouTube channel because I'm active in quite a few Facebook groups. But try and make sure that you have the same profile picture and where applicable, the cover picture as well, just so that if people see you across platforms, they recognize you instantly. A good example was someone I knew really well on Twitter. I was in a Facebook group for freelancers talking, and then someone started talking to me and I replied, and they had quite a common name, similar to sort of like John Smith, where I didn't realize that it was the same person. Their Facebook profile picture was kind of like, I think it was zoomed out. You couldn't see their face very well. It's probably like a holiday snap. And I had no idea it was the same person. And if I knew it was the same person, I might have been like, hey, and talk to them differently and that kind of thing. But I thought they were just a random person. And then it was afterwards when I realized. So just simple things like that. Just make sure you're consistent across the board and people can recognize you across platforms. And the last one, and this sounds really wishy-washy and obvious, but be nice. I have a story from a time I kept my cool when I wanted to. I was very upset and angry with someone. So I spoke at this event over. Oh gosh, actually, maybe I shouldn't show the event because I can't remember if I made it public or not. Ah, it's too late now, and I don't think the event's going anymore. I spoke at I spoke at a design event about 10 years ago, and talking about SEO. And they had this cool thing. It was me and another speaker who was a friend of mine, and they had this thing where the sponsor would buy a book recommended by each speaker and then give it away as a raffle at the end of the event. And they encouraged speakers to choose something that was related to their talk. And I was like, that's a great idea. Great. I know a great SEO book. And there is a great SEO book. I think it's called The Art of SEO. And some very famous SEO people worldwide have contributed. But it is sort of like a textbook. And it is essentially a sort of start to finish, here's everything you need to know about SEO kind of thing. And the other guy, his talk was more general about design and startups, and he chose quite this cool, slick sort of Silicon Valley sort of startup book. And then the sponsor came on the stage, introduced the book, talked, said mine was terrible because I didn't realize he had this rule where he reads the books. Said the book was terrible, it was boring, it was a textbook. The person who won it, when he handed it to them, when they came on stage to get it, he said, enjoy your doorstop. And I was really upset. I was really offended. And at the time, my oldest son had just been born. He was only like a year old. I could have spent the time at home instead of preparing for this talk in front of these people and being humiliated by this really rude guy who was really negative about this book I chose. And I was really tempted to say something at the event, and I didn't. And then I was really tempted to tweet about it afterwards and talk about how this guy was out of order, blah, blah, blah. And I didn't. And I was really tempted to blog about it, and I didn't. And I'm glad I didn't, because a few years later, a locally based designer got in touch with me with a dream. He said, I'm building a website for this company. And this company was a company I was, really wanted to do SEO work for years. They were like dream client territory. And we ended up getting it. I ended up getting it. He did the website. I did the SEO for it. And it was dream come true. And during the process, they said, oh, how did you find me out of it? Interest? And he said, oh, it was at a design event you spoke at. I was like, oh, okay. Did you see the whole thing about what happened with the book I recommended? And he said, well, yeah, I thought the sponsor was a bit harsh, but I thought you were great. I thought the talk was great and wanted to work with you. And I think back on that now, and I think if I'd exploded and gotten really angry and shouted on the stage at this sponsor, or tweeted angrily about it, or blogged angrily about it afterwards, that guy might have thought, okay, I'm not passing you any work. If you're gonna, fly off the handle over stuff like that. So that was one of those things where I'm really, really glad I didn't lose my cool and get angry with this person. And ultimately, and this is just an excuse for me to use a animated GIF in a talk from a movie I loved when I was a teenager, Bill and Ted, be excellent to each other. It's as simple as that. Even the times where you really want to moan and complain and be angry at someone, try your best to avoid that scenario. Number 10, be as niche as possible. So you could say to somebody, you're a web designer. That's great. People know you design websites. But if you say to people you're a WordPress web designer, they know that you design WordPress websites and that maybe you don't do other systems. Maybe you specialize just in WordPress. You could say you're a WordPress web designer who only works in the wedding industry. Again, making it a bit more niche, and people know that you only work with those kinds of websites in that kind of industry. Pardon me. Or you could even be a WordPress web designer who only works on wedding bands' websites. I'm talking here about wedding musicians, not wedding bands as in wedding rings, or it could be the other way around. And you could argue that the more niche you go, you might get to the point where there's only a very small handful of wedding bands who need websites who'd like them built with WordPress. But chances are those people, all else equal, if they meet a person that says, "Hi, I'm a web designer," or they meet a person that says, "Oh, I do WordPress design websites and only work with wedding bands," they're going to go for the latter, surely, because it's more specialized. It makes it easier for other people to refer you, more specialized, as you said, and it makes it easier to sell yourself as well. Yes, you might narrow the pool of people who you can do work for, but ultimately they're going to be more likely to work with you. It might make life easier if you do building lots of websites in the same industry rather than building a website for a wedding band and then a website for a dog groomer and then a website for a mortgage broker and then a website for trying to think of another random example. But you get my point. So that's something to consider as well. Number 11, be you and not your company. I illustrate this with this rather lousy example of my logo for Morgan Online Marketing looking quite small there on the left and my face looking pretty big on the right. What I'm trying to get at here is I put more emphasis on me, Steve Morgan, than I necessarily do on my business name, Morgan Online Marketing. And it got to the point, it was quite funny, where people at the co-working space didn't know my business name. They just knew me as Steve, SEO Steve. One person thought my business name was Steve Morgan Online, which was quite funny. It makes it sound like I'm some sort of like weird celebrity. And yeah, so it's that whole classic thing I heard at networking events years ago, that people buy from people. You might have heard that as well. I think people are going to resonate more with even if though I have a business called Morgan Online Marketing and there's Morgan in the business name, people are more likely to remember me and my name than maybe the business name. I think people respond better to faces than logos as well. I know I do. If I see somebody online and it's a photo, a picture, makes it easier to remember, makes it more authentic and personable. I'm jumping ahead here, but like the authenticity thing, you're less likely to be a fly-by-night operation if you've got your name and your photo and your face attached to something than just a business logo. And ultimately as well, it makes it easier for you to be recognized as well. I remember there's one guy who I spoke to on Twitter for years, and then he came to me at an SEO event and I was like, "Who are you?" And I realized he'd never shared a photo of himself. And then he said, "Oh, I'm so and so." And as soon as he said the name, I was like, "Oh, I know who you are," but I had no idea what he looked like. So, it helps on that front as well. And ultimately, it's more personable, because you're a person and you're showing the person side of your personage. Whatever words I should be using there. And this is the last one. Style yourself through testimonials. So when you say good things about yourself, I think it's tacky. I think it's really, it's whenever somebody says, "Oh, I've got this service, it's really good," or "I've just put out this blog post and it's amazing," or "I've put out this course and it's the best." It's no, stop, please. But if other people say good things about it, that's great. If people other people say it's good, then that's a thumbs up from me. And I believe that you shouldn't go out there telling everyone how good you are. You should let other people do it for you through things like testimonials, reviews, ratings, and so on. I have what I call the LinkedIn technique, which is I think a lot of people, when they ask for a testimonial, they'll send an email to the client. The client will email back the testimonial. You put it on your website. That's great, but it's not really authenticated or come from somewhere, and so people don't know if you've just made it up. You could have just made the text up rather than copy and pasted it from the client's email. So by getting the LinkedIn, I try to ask clients to leave it on LinkedIn first and then copy and paste it onto a website. And not all of them do, and that's fine. Some people don't use LinkedIn. Some people don't like the idea of doing it on LinkedIn and would rather do it by email, and that's fine. But the majority will do it on LinkedIn. And then I can say, people can see on my LinkedIn profile. I know there's a whole thing that, you can have a fake LinkedIn profiles, but they can see it is attached to potentially, should be real people rather than just being some words that you could have made up. And also awards. Now, awards, I could probably spend 40 minutes talking my experience about awards and how some awards are great, some awards are probably not worth it, some awards are only in it for the money and they can be a scam and you've got to be careful and things like that. But ultimately, there are good awards out there, and if you can be nominated or there be a finalist for some or win some, then that's going to help you out as well. Whether that's industry specific awards or local awards, business awards, what have you. And if you're just starting out, if you're new to freelancing, you say, "Well, that's great, Steve, but I haven't had many clients yet, so I can't get many testimonials." this isn't the best, but it's better than nothing. On LinkedIn, the great thing is when you leave someone a testimonial, you say how you're connected to the person. You can say if you know them because they're they've done some work for you, they're a client, or it could be that you know them through university. You went to the same university, you worked at the same company. So you could ask fellow college and university students. I did this in my early days where I used to be involved with the Live Music Society and this student radio station. And some of them gave me recommendations on LinkedIn that probably still are on LinkedIn. Or colleagues from pre-freelancing jobs. So agencies I've worked at in the past, a couple of the people there said, oh, I worked with Steve in the department, SEO or marketing department, and he was great, blah, blah, blah. And it's not the best. Like, a lot of people say don't work with friends and family, and I kind of agree with that. But you could get to, like, sort of treat them more as character recommendations or references. But you could, if you're really desperate, get some friends and family to sort of give some recommendations. And then you've got a few that in the future, when you get testimonials from actual clients, you've got even more, or you could remove, they can kind of replace the previous ones, the ones that are friends and family, that kind of thing. And that's it pretty much. So to summarize, there's more to networking than just business networking, and there should be something for everyone, even the least businessy of us. Go to semi-related events or conferences or whatever instead of just what you do. If you're a copywriter, don't just go to copywriting events or webinars or groups. Go to things related to SEO or web development and stuff. Other places where people may need a writer or may need to know a writer. Run your own something, as mentioned before, an event, a podcast, a community, or whatever. Be good, nice, and helpful to people, and be a person, not a faceless company. And what it should lead to is that people will sell you for you, so you don't have to. And you can sell yourself without even trying. And it can also make the overall sales process easier. So that example of those guys I met at the Cardiff SEO Meet event I used to host, it was so easy. They just basically said, oh, meet our boss next week. They'd already sold me internally to the boss. The boss was on board. I met them and she was just like, great, when, can you help us? And I think the fee I quoted was absolutely fine. Whereas if I was a complete stranger, they might have been talking to multiple people. They might have been a bit iffy on price, but they knew that I was good for it, good and would help them, and that was reputable, and I knew my stuff through running this event. And yeah, it just made everything easier. It makes clients easier to sell to. And who knows, you may even begin to enjoy sales, unbelievably, as you reach your vision of networking nirvana, where just networking, you don't even call it networking anymore. It just kind of happens and it's nice and easy and, perfect. I'll do a quick ad, he says, not wanting to sell himself, for the book. So the book now is about 5 years old, but a lot of the information is still relevant even today. It's won 5 Business Book Awards, and various people said some nice things about it. It's available as paperback, Kindle, audiobook, and PDF. The first 3 formats through things like Amazon, audiobook through Audible, and I think iTunes. PDFs available from Gumroad is called. All the links are on the website anyway.
I just stuck them in the chat there, Steve, as well for you. Yeah.
What's that? Sorry.
I just stuck the Gumroad link into the chat there.
Oh, thank you. Oh, cool. I can't see it right now. I didn't know, but appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah. So, and then if you want to keep in touch, anti-sell.com is the website with information about the book. There's a blog. Some of the blog posts are additional stuff I haven't talked about today, and stuff in the book. Some of the stuff I have talked about today is in the book, but some stuff isn't. And those are my social media profiles. I will say I'm probably most active on Twitter and X. Twitter/X. I'm terrible at Instagram. I'm quiet on Threads and Blue Sky. And the reason there's an asterisk next to LinkedIn is that I have a rule where I only connect to people if I know them. So please don't be offended if you try to connect to me and I decline it. However, if you send a message saying, oh, Steve, I saw your indie list talk, then chances are I'll probably accept it. So